Okay, let's go back and look at John 1 for a minute, as I've said we were going to do. I've said it before, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth is not simply the first verse of the Bible. It is the chief premise and the foundation upon which the entire biblical revelation rests. And in a sense, as well as no, not even in a sense, also our faith. Everything that exists, or ever will exist, or ever did exist, it is obligated. The creator of all things is owed the service and worship of everyone, not just the Christians. And all will be called to account for that. And that is Paul's point in Romans chapter 1. Just because you're not a believer in Christ, it does not let you off the hook. Everyone is accountable to his creator, and we will all give an account to him. And so you will see from the start to finish, from the beginning of the Bible to the end, the primacy of the creator and the distinguishing feature of our God, of the God of the universe over every other so-called gods. All the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. That's the distinctive thing. And so we have a Redeemer, as it turns out, who we now know to be the creator through supernatural revelation. It is simply stated as a brute fact in John chapter 1, which I want to compare to Genesis chapter 1. We have supernatural revelation given to a human being about the foundational premise of our faith in our world, which is that Jesus, and look at Colossians 2, is identified as God's creative hand, if you will, and the Spirit is in there too, which is for another day. But anyway, Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. John chapter 1 takes it one step farther. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. He is the creator of all things without remainder to be explained. We'll get back to the Word in a second. Then there's Paul's statement under supernatural revelation as well, probably a creedal statement. So we don't know how it originated, but it is the same thought. Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. By him, all things were created. And we get this without remainder, overdone, exaggerated, repetitive nature to make the point. All things were, by him, all things were created, both in the heavens and on the earth. There's the heavens and the earth from Genesis chapter 1. Visible and invisible, as if heavens and earth didn't cover it. Thrones, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, as if visible and invisible wouldn't have covered it. He goes back to all things now. All things have been created through him and for him. And you can see the redundancy there. It's extraordinary. And he is before all things, and now he takes it one step further under supernatural revelation. And in him all things consist or hold together or are sustained or something like that. Hebrews takes it, has the same thought. He is the radiance of his glory and upholds all things by his powerful word. So what we have here then is new information about the creator, and that is that he is now, by virtue of his work on the cross and resurrection, the Redeemer. So we have a creator redeemer in that order. He is creator of all things, and by virtue of being creator, he has become redeemer. So we have a creator redeemer, and that is in the Nicene Creed as well. We believe in one God, the Father Almighty, the maker of all things. Now I've forgotten it already. We should go back and read that sometimes. We'll look at that next week. It's embedded in the Nicene Creed, the greatest, in my view, the greatest creedal statement in the history of the church. We'll go back and look and see how that idea, the creator is the chief premise of the Nicene Creed as well. It's the most succinct creedal statement in the history of the church, 225 words or something like that, premised based on the creator of all things. And so you have this idea of the word in John 1. In the beginning was the word. So whereas Genesis says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, John interrupts that flow with, in the beginning was the word. The word was with God and was God. Then he gets to it. All things came into being through him. So what is this word thing? Well, you just have to wait till verse 3 of Genesis. Then God said, let there be light. And then on day 2, and God said, day 3, God said, 4, said, 5, the word of God in every single one of those creative elements, one after another. And so here we have that creative word, that all-powerful, sustaining creative word identified. He is the Son of God, now incarnate in a man, as a man. So you can see how profound is John's weaving in his commentary, his divinely inspired commentary, reading between the lines under the inspiration of the Spirit, reading between the lines of Genesis chapter 1 to fill it out and give you insights into the creation story that you never knew before until the incarnation. Then it continues in verse 4, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. He weaves together these two ideas of life and light. And so we can drop down to Genesis chapter 2 there in verse 7. The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. John picks up on that idea. And the life was the light of men. Where does that come from? We're back to verse 3. God said, let there be light. His first creative act, there was light. God saw that the light was good. And in this case, John one-ups it. The light was not only good, the light was the incarnate God, so to speak. And then he brings in the idea of darkness. The light shines in the darkness, like it did in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 and 4. And the darkness shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There's a debatable issue on that translation. We'll go with overcome for a moment. And so the light is greater than the darkness. So he takes these ideas of physical light and physical darkness, existential light and darkness, into the sort of spiritual realm where Jesus is the light, who will become the light of the world in John. And the men who live in darkness, who won't acknowledge the light and scatter. John 3:19, Phil. This is the judgment, that light has come into the world, but men love the darkness rather than the light, because their deeds were evil. By the way,
during the separation of light and darkness, 1 John 1:5, I think it is. This is the message we've heard from the beginning, that God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all.
Yeah.
That's a constant contrast through in 1 John.
Yeah. Little commentary on John 3:19. Men love the darkness rather than the light. It kind of destroys a lot of sermons. That's agape. So much for God's unconditional love. Men do not unconditionally love the darkness. Their love of the darkness is highly conditional. Highly conditional. But that's another issue with Greek. Anyway, not to burst any bubbles on that issue. We can argue about that later. Probably not going to change my mind. All right. All right. So that's just great. The power of inspiration and how understated it is. You just read these things and you think that they deduce these things from what was written before or from what happened in Jesus' life. Well, you're not going to deduce from just, if you're Paul, you're not deducing from Jesus' life and from the Bible, the Old Testament, that you're not going to deduce what he says right there in Colossians. That's not human deduction, that's supernatural inspiration. That's giving us insight into the nature of things and creation that no human being had access to. That's my view on that sort of thing. And you want to comment on that or disagree with it or anything? Okay. That's too colorful, but I don't know. The blues line up, the greens line up, the oranges line up, and the yellows line up. The creator of all things. Nobody will escape him. We will all stand before him. Man, woman, and child. However child works, I don't know. All right. Anybody want to comment on that? Profound stuff. A little bit farther in John chapter 1, the word is the profundity, it's the profound nature of the incarnation, God becoming man. The word who was in the beginning with God and was God, in John 14, becomes flesh and made his tabernacle among us. And we beheld his glory. Glory as of the only begotten Son of God. Is that how it goes there?
The only begotten Son of God, full of grace and truth.
Yeah. And so his capturing of the magnitude of the idea of the incarnation in that passage, which may be the point from John 1 through 4 to 14 to get to the point. He says what he says in 1 earlier in 1:1 and through 4, so that you can understand the magnitude of the incarnation in verse 14. The word became flesh. I was reading I think it was one of the Greek grammar books that I've worked through. So he said that he called the word became flesh, which is 4 words in Greek as well. He calls it the densest, pithiest theological statement in the entire Bible. It'd be hard to pack more theological insight and profoundness into 4 words than the word became flesh. It's an extraordinary 4 words from a guy who wasn't all that good in Greek, John, the author of that book. But you didn't have to be. He didn't write. The New Testament was not written by Greek scholars. Nor was the New Testament written in scholarly Greek. It was written in Koine Greek, which is common Greek, the Greek of the streets. Like English is the language of commerce or something like that. Okay. Before I get too wound up on that, because we could go forever, let's see where we're at. Anybody want to comment on that? Which was not a part of the plan either. Okay. Finish off 15. Did this thing say recording in progress a little while ago?
Yes.
I can't remember people's names either when they introduce themselves to me. Hi, I'm so and so.
Contagious.
Huh?
Must be contagious.
Why? You do the same thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't be a very good politician for that. Politicians remember every single name, but I don't know that I would call that a virtue among them. Okay, let's finish off 15. One of the big forks in the road in the history of redemption, because we're dealing with the covenant with Abraham. I was thinking about this covenant. I was thinking about promise and covenant in these chapters. And it occurred to me, I might be slightly wrong here. I'm almost certainly slightly wrong in ways that I don't know about, because you don't know what you don't know. But I was thinking about some of the things I've said, how we're all brought into the covenant with Abraham. I've said that many, many times, that God has, through faith, through Christ, God has flung open the doors of the covenant so that the Gentiles could come streaming in and receive the blessings of the covenant that the Jews have been receiving. And I don't think that's wrong, but I think it might require a little more nuance, because Paul never says it that way. What he says is he refers to the promise. He doesn't refer to the covenant with Abraham with regard to Gentiles. He refers to the promise. The promise would be chapter 12. For the promise to Abraham or to his descendants that he would be heir of the whole world. That's Genesis chapter 1 through, that's chapter 12. I will make of you a great nation, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. That's the promise in chapter. That's not the covenant. The covenant is for land. What came not through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. So the law here then becomes a covenant. In the Jewish eyes, it was the law that was the covenant. Oftentimes, when you see reference to the covenant in New Testament writing, don't look carefully. There's more than a 50% chance the author's referring to the covenant with Abraham. Moses, the Mosaic law, the Mosaic covenant on Mount Sinai, not the covenant with Abraham. But anyway, this is reference to the promise. For this reason, it is by faith in order that it may be in accordance with grace, so that the promise will be guaranteed to all the descendants, not just to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham, Jews and Gentiles, who is the father of us all, both Jews and Gentiles. So then there's 5 references here to the promise in this little section in Romans chapter 4. And I just highlight them right here. No mention of the covenant with Abraham. So we received the promises that were made to Abraham. We received the blessing that was promised to Abraham without reference to the covenant explicitly. So I have to think about that a little bit. Not that I'm backing away from the idea that we have been brought in to the covenant, but you get the same thought in Galatians. For you are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. These are people who wanted to go back to the Mosaic covenant. They wanted to put themselves under Moses by being circumcised and put themselves back under the law. And this is the book in which he basically, if I can sum it up, where he says, "Are you crazy?" to these people, to sum it up in 3 words. For all of you, verse 27, were baptized into Christ Jesus, clothe yourselves with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek in Christ. Moses is abrogated. Moses is gone. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. You're all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's descendants, heirs according to the promise. Genesis chapter 12. And then the grace statement. Remember that you were at that time, prior to faith, separate from Christ, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel. There's your reference to the covenant. Israel is the covenant nation. Strangers to the covenants of promise. And because you had no part in the covenant of promise, whatever he means by that, having no hope and without God in the world, lost in the world and in darkness. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were formerly far off, and by far off he means exiled, have been brought near through the blood of Christ. There's the great miracle. All right, that's enough of that. Any comments on that? Come on, somebody has to disagree with some of that. I just made that up. I didn't have any of that written down. No, nothing written down. You have to have some kind of disagreement with that. All right. 15. We are closing in here. Let's go with, I think we finished off roughly here with this reference to Amorites. This strange calling out, for uniqueness, the Amorite, given the fact that Abraham had an alliance with an Amorite that helped him bring back Lot and stuff just 1 chapter earlier, which is weird. So now they have their covenant ceremony, the covenant for land. It came about when the sun had set, that it was very dark. Behold, there appeared a smoking oven, and a flaming torch was passed between the pieces, because he had taken the sacrificial animals and separated them. And now this flaming torch, whatever this is, probably escapes human categorization. The best you can do is a smoking oven and a flaming torch. If you saw it, you would probably say, okay, I see why he had trouble capturing the essence of this phenomenon, but it cuts kind of look like the best we can do is a smoking oven and a flaming torch. On that day, the Lord, Yahweh, the covenant God, the God identified by Moses, the God who identified himself to Moses with those 4 letters that that get translated in that passage in in Exodus chapter 3. I am who I am. I am who am. Yahweh. I think it's just the English infinitive, to be, or something like that. Made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants, I have given this land. So you can see it's explicit. The covenant is for land. The promise is greater than that, upon which the covenant was based. But this is the covenant with the people of Israel. From the river of Egypt as far as the great river, which he identifies as the river Euphrates, and then he highlights 10 nations. Is it 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The Kenite, how does he characterize the land? He characterizes the land geographically and then ethnically or something like that. Have I got this right? It's almost an incomplete sentence. The land of, I guess it would be the land of the Kenite and so on and so forth. But the Kenite, the Kenizzite, the Cadmonite who disappear, I believe Caleb's going to be a Kenite. But the Kenizzite and the Cadmonite, I don't remember any references to them after this. I could be wrong. Hittite, Perizzite, the Rephaim, I don't know what that is either. The Amorite, the Canaanite, the Girgashite, Shite, and the Jebusite.
The Rephaim and the Giants.
Yeah, I guess that's right, yeah. So, he's talking about this right here. It's all around them. I'm not even sure all of these people are well developed yet in this area right here. So they're going to disappear from Canaan. He's going to move the people aside from Canaan, going to take them to Egypt into slavery, where they will huddle together in pseudo-hostile territory and develop an ethnic identity distinct from other people groups. While this evil grows in Canaan, he doesn't, I'm just going to think for him, think out loud here. He doesn't want them assimilating or being a part of the evil that's going to grow over the next 400 years, 430 years in Canaan. So he's going to remove them out and move them to Egypt. None of this could you know beforehand, but he gives the outline to Abraham, the broadest outline to Abraham, and that they're going to get, it's kind of hard. Let's see, I'm going to make this big here so I can go look at it. Where am I? Slideshow. I need the shortcuts. Let's see. So what is the river of Egypt?
I would say it's the Nile.
That's way over here.
Yeah.
There's this other river. There's this other river that's down here somewhere. That's the next best candidate. It got nobody. There's hard to tell exactly what he means by the Nile. They never took the Nile. They never took all the way to the Nile. They did take this under David from this little river Wadi that here's Gaza. So the,
Yeah, well,
you know, like right here, it's just to the east of, or just to the west of Gaza. Gaza is the southernmost. It's the southwest edge of Israel to this day. Gaza is, and then the Euphrates is way over there on to the east, and that will actually be taken by David. They will control that. They will control that entire land.
sound on both, probably.
Yeah, for like a generation or something like
To the
that.
Euphrates or no?
Yeah, to the Euphrates. Yeah, here.
But I think God intended that basically all of Israel would be from basically the edge of Egypt all the way up to the Euphrates River.
Yeah.
That's what his plan was, but they didn't do what God wanted them to do, so.
And so the river of Egypt, if it's not the Nile, and I don't think it is, because I would think he'd just say the Nile.
I think it's pretty much the edge of where Egypt starts. And
It's this river here that if you online, you'll see all sorts of reading on it, but not, I mean, it's internet, so, you know, not sure they know anything more than I do. But, okay. That's that.
Going back to that flaming torch.
Yeah.
When you think about the first hearers of this being the children of Israel who were in the wilderness wanderings, and they're being led by a pillar of fire by night, I wonder if they related it to that.
What did they know and when did they know it? And what would they have thought of it? Because, I mean, I've said many times, they would have had the same conception, which was their downfall, that first generation. They would have had the same conception of Yahweh, the God of Abraham, as they did of Ra, the sun god, or the moon god, or any of these other gods. They had a very localized territorial understanding of these deities. And so from the vantage point of the Egyptians, probably Yahweh would have been considered the God of the Sinai. There's this desert God, the God of the wilderness, who's angry with us, like the God of the Ark of the Covenant that got taken to the Philistine territory. Well, we got to get this out of our territory. What do we do here? How do we appease this God? We get him back to his territory. We took him out of his territory, and now he's on a rampage in our territory. So we have to get him out of the house. So they put him on a cart with those cows that don't know better than to just go where they're going. They don't know where their mother is. That's an interesting part of the story. And the cows just take the ark up the road to Beth Shemesh. And they all go, the Philistines all breathe a sigh of relief. Phew, we got rid of him. He's back in his own territory. He's going to leave us alone now. Well, no, he's not, but wait for it. That's going to be the answer to that one. But here, I believe these people would have thought the same, including the Israelites would have thought the same thing about Yahweh. And so when God drags these people out of Egypt, to them, he's the God of the wilderness. And so they're at Sinai, and they're on their way to Sinai, and there's no food and there's no water, and they start grumbling. Well, they blame it on the God and the messenger of the God, who is Moses, and they want to go back to the land of plenty, which is those gods. So let's get out of this land, this God's land, because this is a disaster. And let's go back to the land of the gods that we had before, where we got the cucumbers and the leeks. What's a leek? But does anybody know?
Yeah, but an onion type thing.
Yeah. So they, it took them a lot. They never really conquered it. They never really understood. I mean, even when they got to Canaan, back to Canaan, under Joshua, within a generation or two, they were assimilating. And Yahweh, you can see it in that story of Micah and the idol, where they're going to mother makes an idol. His mother makes an idol and names him Yahweh, because she got her money back that got stolen. She names the little idol Yahweh. The household idol now is Yahweh. He's just another household idol to these people. It wasn't just, it's not that they stopped worshiping him. They did worse than that. They relegated him to the same stature as these gods that the nations had, the household idols, and the god of this and the god of that.
I mean, a lot of practice, and probably even in ancient Israel, was you had your national god, Yahweh. You had a household god, and you had your own personal God. And so when you get to the Ten Commandments, I am Yahweh, you shall have no other gods before me.
It's a striking statement. It's a striking statement for a people that have never heard anything like that, have no experience of it.
And they never got rid of it.
They never did.
When you get to Jeremiah, you find out when Jeremiah was forced to go to Egypt after the exile time, they were worshiping these gods, and he confronted them, and the women got after him and said, "We've always done it this way, we're going to continue to do it."
Yeah, I've said before, I don't think it's original with me. I don't know where I got it, but if you ask the question, when did Israel become? When did Deuteronomy 6? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. There was one guy. Was that Deuteronomy 6? You ask, when did that become reality in the mindset of their national identity? My answer is sometime after the exile.
Yeah, during the time of Ezra, probably.
And later in the exile. If you look at by the time of Jesus, when the New Testament when New Testament opens up and you look at these Jews out among the nations, they are Yahweh worshipers. They believe in one God and no others. And they viewed with contempt the pagans around them on precisely that basis. And so what happened somewhere around there, they learned the lesson, and idolatry was expunged from the national consciousness of Jews. That doesn't mean you didn't have some who did, because you got the magician Simon, and you got these Jews like that, but as a people, whether they were Hellenistic Jews out in the Roman world, or, you know, in Judea and Galilee, they were monotheists at this point. But that did not happen until after the exile, after the post-exile, the return from exile, sometime at the return from exile and after. So what they did, what Nehemiah and Ezra did, stuck. It did stick, because when you open up in the New Testament, 400 years later, 500 years later, that land is monotheistic, that Ezra and Nehemiah began the resettlement of under the Persians, with just Jews. But then so are the Hellenistic Jews from around the empire. They had other problems, had to do with the law of Moses and some other things. Okay. Let's see, what else do I want to say? About 15, I think we're about done here. So the promise, let's just look at the promise again. Very simple, that's all it is. These, let me get rid of these. I don't know why the footnotes keep coming back. They do. I'm thinking out loud, I shouldn't do that. I'm still thinking out loud. Look at me, I'm still doing it. So there it is in verse 13 through basically 13 and 14. He doesn't identify the land, but the readers know what the land is, because the readers just came out of Egypt. So they just got the answers of a lifetime. Why did we just spend 430 years in Egypt as slaves? You're essentially strangers in a land that is not theirs. They will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years, four generations, so 100 years per generation in the mind of the author and God. I will judge the nation whom they serve. It doesn't say how. We've already had a little bit of anticipation of that, because when Abraham traveled to Egypt to avoid the famine, that Pharaoh experienced plagues from God, which anticipate the plagues that you see in Exodus. But all he says here is, I will judge the nation whom they serve. They have no idea what I will judge means at this point, but the Israelites who just came out of Egypt, they understand what this passage means. And afterward, they will come out with many possessions. I will just point out so they will basically plunder. Another parallel, anticipation. The story of Abraham going to Egypt previously is filled with eerie anticipation of what's going to happen in the future, because he came out with many possessions because the Pharaoh gave him all sorts of riches. Well, here, that's what he says. There were plagues on that Pharaoh. Abraham traveled to Egypt. There were plagues on that Pharaoh when he wronged Pharaoh. I mean, he wronged Abraham, even though he didn't know he was doing it. And then he received many possessions from that Pharaoh. So now, 430 years later, after they become slaves, they will wrong the descendants of Abraham. God will plague the Pharaoh, and they will come out with many possessions, exactly like Abraham did. And you can see that in the language, that it's explicit, and the same author wants you to understand that it's explicit, that the promise, the covenant statement was fulfilled to the letter. Somewhere. What happened to the word plunder? There it is. Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, for they had requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold, clothing, and the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that by this point the Egyptians just want them out. As I've said before, it's not an exodus, it's an expulsion. You could name the book The Expulsion. So that they let them have their request. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. In a similar way, Abraham plundered the Egyptians. I don't know. But it's eerie parallels with what actually happened. They will receive the land not because of any righteousness on their part. They are distinguished by their lack of it. The authors, it's interesting, the authors of the Bible from beginning to end have no interest in proclaiming the virtues of their own people. On the contrary, they never miss the opportunity to highlight the faults. The biblical authors are fault finders. Every one of them, even in the New Testament. You see it in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You'll see it in Acts, the quibble between Paul and Barnabas, and the reference to John Mark turning back with Cyprus, I think, on the first journey. You know, there's only one hero in the Bible. Everybody else has egg on their face.
Yeah.
And the authors have no problem reporting the egg on people's faces. Why did I say all that?
That's
Oh, yeah.
actually proof of the authentication of the.
Yes, it is. Indeed, it is. Why would you write a story that makes your own people look terrible? And in the case of John Mark, if he wrote Mark, which I believe he did, why would you write a story that makes both you and the person who's probably behind the writing, Peter, also look unflattering? But they did. Where was I? Oh, Deuteronomy.
I have a hard time spelling that word.
Me too. 6, 9. Lest they get confused that they're being given this land because they're so great. Do not say in your heart when the Lord, this is just before the conquest. Do not say in your heart when the Lord your God has driven them out from before you. Because of my righteousness, the Lord has brought me in to possess this land, but it is not because of the but it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is dispossessing them before you. I repeat, it is not for your righteousness or for the uprightness of your heart that you are going to possess their land, but it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord your God is driving them out before you in order to confirm the covenant, so on and so forth. I repeat, know then, I repeat, verse 6, it is not because of your righteousness God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stubborn people. Writes the author who is a part of the people. You know, it's a scathing condemnation on the part of God toward his own people, who the author bothers to point out repetitively 3 different times.
The same things carried through the New Testament regarding all believers. Not because of our
Yeah.
righteousness. We've done the according to his mercy.
Yeah, Romans chapter 3 leaves no one out. Doesn't leave anyone out. If he's not trying to make a statement about universal depravity in Romans chapter 3, I think it's about verse 9 or verse 10. How would he have to change the passage to make it be a statement of universal depravity? It's the same thing I say about Genesis 6:5. God saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. If that's not universal depravity, change it so that it would be universal depravity.
Yeah, I think
And it's going to be the same words. Human beings like to be flattered. They don't like to be unflattered. Nobody showed up at a movie theater to see themselves insulted. The Bible's one big insult to the human race. We talked about covenant ratifying. Abraham protected the carcasses. I don't know why that's important, but he did it. A little local color there. All right, that's all I got. That list of peoples right here, that's going to change. There's no standard list of nations that get dispossessed. I was just doing a search through here. You know, you can see them here in Joshua, which was the book of the conquest. It's the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Perizzite, the Girgasite, Amorite, and Jebusite. That's a different list from the previous. It's also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, It's 7. Then, what else we got here? Here's one. Is this the same? The Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite. Is that the same, but a different 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 6, and they're in a different order. You got the Canaanite and the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, Jebusite, the Hivite. I don't know. They're kind of all over the place. So there's the Philistine. There's the Philistine. All right, that's enough of that. Bad people, apparently. They're starting to unearth some of those archaeological digs, archaeological sites. There's questions about child sacrifice and so forth. They go into that. That's all debated too. I don't know that it's debated that they did it. It's debated whether the sites are actually that's the archaeology, whether that's what those archaeological sites show. All right. Turn the page. Did pretty well. 3 weeks or so, 15. Let's do Ishmael. Happy days. God has promised Abraham an heir, and that heir, the family of that heir would receive the land. That's the promise. What could go wrong, right? Just like when God said, go to Canaan and I will go to the land that I will show you and I will make of you a great nation. What could go wrong? Well, I'll tell you what could go wrong. He heads right out the south side and goes into Egypt and allows his wife to be brought into the harem of the Pharaoh, from which she will never return. That's what can go wrong. So here we have the promise. I mean, you have the covenant. God binds himself to this oath. And what could go wrong? Well, this is what can go wrong. The same kind of thing as when he first got to the land. Sarai, Abram's wife, had born him with no children. She had an Egyptian. Oh, there's a little callback. Where on earth did Sarah get an Egyptian slave? Whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, behold, now this is the irony, this is such an ironic statement, think about it. The Lord has prevented me from bearing children. One chapter earlier, he promises effectively that Sarah will bear him a child. One chapter later, Sarah makes what virtually amounts to an accusation. I don't know what it is, but the Lord has not just has not given me any children, but has prevented me from having children. Please go to my maid. Perhaps I can obtain children through her, because that's how they rolled in those days. Abraham listened to the voice of Sarah. Why? I don't know. I don't know. And after Abraham had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, the Egyptian, and then a reminder of the Egyptian, her maid, second use, gave her to her husband Abram as his wife. So now he's got 2 wives. He went into Hagar and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she despised her mistress. She wanted, what does that mean? That she wants this? She has to turn this baby over to Sarah. That's what this is about. Sarah's going to take the possession of the baby as her own, and he's going to become the heir. And Hagar at this point, no, I want this one. Is that how this is to be read? I believe so. Somebody has a different take. That's the way I take it.
I always got that she looked down on her mistress. Put over at hers. Her mistress was dishonorable in her eyes.
Yeah, I don't know that it means anything different from what I just said. I mean, why? The reason you despise the mistress is because you have to turn this kid over to her. And Sarah said to Abram, may the wrong done to me be upon you. I gave my maid into your arms, but when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her sight. So the woman who accused God of preventing her from having a baby now says, may the Lord judge between you and me. So she admitted in her own mind that God was preventing her from having a baby. So she goes around that prevention by God, that roadblock, to do this, and then goes to Abraham with the mindset that that she's on the side of right, and God will vindicate her or something like that. It's just such a strange mindset. I don't know that I can fully understand it. But Abram said to Sarai, behold, your maid is in your power. Do to her what is good in your sight, because that's how they rolled back then. So Sarai treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence.
Another question from your statement. Are you saying that Hagar, was despised of her mistress, or was Sarah despised of Hagar?
Hagar despised Sarah.
That's the way I read. I read that Sarah was despised Hagar because was able to get pregnant.
I don't believe
Just a minute.
her mistress was despised and herself.
I gave my maid into your arms, but when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her sight. Verse 5.
Maybe I'm
What,
wrong,
which,
but
I mean, that's what it says.
I know, but I'm just saying.
It is confusing.
I read it the opposite way, that Sarah was actually despised Hagar because she was able to get pregnant. And so she didn't like the fact that she
Is
was.
this mutual?
Well, it could be, no doubt about that, but it was certainly Sarah's idea.
I think it's mutual. I think you're onto something. Yeah, I think this was a mutual. I don't know who was the primal cause. Sarah despised Hagar, so Hagar despised her back.
I'm sure, yeah.
But this is now a two-way.
So Abraham, okay, you do what you think you need to do. So basically Sarah says, okay, tell her to go, leave.
Actually, she fled. She escaped. She wasn't told to leave. Not yet. She escapes. But we'll get to that in a second.
I'm just stuck on, Sarah being upset with Abraham for doing what she told him to do.
Well, he's just he does not look particularly, he just got the promise. What do you do? I mean, did you think this was the manner in which God was going to fulfill the promise he had just made in the chapter previous? It's just, he just got through talking about Abraham believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Now there's this. So it's like the author said, man, I made him sound really, really good in chapter 15. He doesn't have any egg on his face. Now, boom, and he throws an egg and hits him right in the face.
It's hard for us to put ourselves in that place, number one, because we grew up in a society where they can only have one wife, which, by the way, is biblical, one man for one woman. But Abraham grew up in a society where you could have
Totally.
a whole harem. And so it's hard for us to understand what's going through his mind.
And part of the reason that they did that, I mean, it sounds like, it's not like they were thinking, no, I just want a lot of wives. I want women. Yeah, it's not that. It's this. You had to have you could take no chance that you wouldn't have an heir. And so that's where harems come from, I think. And I'll give you a good example of this. Augustus, the first emperor, Octavian, became Augustus Caesar, the grandnephew of Julius Caesar, but Augustus was the first emperor. He had a daughter named Julia. I'm going off of memory here. He had a daughter named Julia, and she was the only way he was going to get an heir. And the emperorship was passed down genealogically, genetically. So it was done like this, which is a great fault of the early Romans, that they didn't choose their next emperor based on merit. It was not a meritocracy. It was based on descendants. And so that's how you end up with Tiberius. So what happened was Julia couldn't, make a long story short, there were 3 or 4 attempts. He gave Julia to this is terrible. He gives Julia, his daughter, to this one and doesn't get a son out of it. So he takes her away from him and gives her to another one, doesn't get a son out of it. And she finally gets sick and tired of it. So she just starts messing around with everybody just to get even with them, and it's this huge mess. But he ends up without an heir. So he ends up adopting Tiberius, his something nephew or whatever, I don't know. So he could have an heir, and he becomes the emperor. But he's not a particularly good emperor. He's not there because he's good. He's there because that was the only person, that's the only relative that Augustus could find. And then Tiberius kind of did the same thing. He chooses Caligula, who was the son of Germanicus, who was another relative, because that's the only thing he can do. You know, that's how they did these things. And the result was then it took till, that's what happened to, I mean, that's why the Roman Empire was so rocky a lot of the time.
May I ask a question about perspective? So is this an illustration of consequences of failure to trust the Lord? And then
Are you trying to abstract, trying to pull out of it and like a general application point? Then I would say yes.
I'm trying to say
Yes.
where it starts.
Yeah,
I mean,
but this,
you know, you've got all this stuff that developed. It all could have been avoided if she would have trusted.
yeah, I would say that that's a little bit of 20/20 hindsight, because from her perspective, can you say that she did something wrong here? That the narrator doesn't say she did. She maintains her own righteousness. May the Lord judge between you and me. And we're watching this battle go on, this thing go on, and we have our own sensibilities about it. But to the players, Abraham doesn't think he did anything wrong, and Sarah doesn't think she did anything wrong.
And as I was contemplating that, I thought about probably the first time I read that, I thought, this trust the Lord. And then I looked at my own life.
Well, yeah. It's a valid point. But nobody here would admit they did anything wrong. All three of the players think they're blameless. Hagar, Sarah, Abraham, all three think they're blameless. And God does not condemn any of them. And neither does the author. It just is unfolding in chaos. That's what I would call it. In chaos, out of which God's redemptive purpose continues. Out of this threat to the promise.
And it's no surprise to God, and he's part of his plan, but it's in the process, it's illustrating how important it is to honor God with our attitude towards trust.
Before I was getting out of it, if you want to don't do just what you do, Abraham keeps doing what you do.
Yeah.
He's not particularly actually working on things like either.
Yeah, he's doing the passively easy thing. He's doing the easy thing passively. If it can be noble to say, go thou and do whatever you want, then okay, here's noble. Very rarely is go thou and do whatever you want the noble thing. And my application out of this is the other way around, what I just said. Look at how God's redemptive purpose is preserved. There's nothing you can do in ignorance or malicious forethought on either side of it to thwart God's purpose. He gets it done every single time, no matter what humans do, period. That's the lesson that I take out of it. 10:15. We'll pick up there next time. Laura got the last word. Well, I got the last word. I only talk because I didn't want you to have the last word. So do you want to get a last word in before I? All right, let's go ahead and shut down. Nate, Naomi, and Gabe, thanks for joining. Stacy, I think, is out there too.